morning saying, everyone has to change, you know? So, so I said, what I meant by that was, but what I did mean was, no one has to change, but everyone has to have the conversation. And all of the changes you want will come out of that conversation. There's a way in which we've taken on change now as another burden. You know, we're creatures of belonging. We're also creatures of burden. Human beings have a very hard time putting down weight in their life, you know. You'll always take on more, and instead of putting down weight, you'll often say, well, I'm carrying a lot on this side, just balance me out on this, you know, and I'll be able to carry it. And a little on my back at the same time, I'll stay upright, you know. And a person, for instance, you know, gets a raise at work, and they immediately go out and get a slightly larger car just to soak it up, you know. And you get a promotion, you had a dent to your house, you know. You get an inheritance, and you invest it in such a way that it keeps you awake at night. Human beings have always had a very difficult time with freedom, you know. And I think it's because one of the most frightening things for a human being is to actually claim their own happiness in life. Because your happiness has to do with your belonging. And your belonging has to do with this fluid kind of engagement with the world, which is impatient with any kind of false identities you may have built for yourself. But sometimes we put all our eggs in the basket of those false identities to the point at which your own creativity would be the thing that would scare you to death the most, because you know you would not survive that engagement, you know. You would not survive that conversation in the manner to which you had become accustomed, you know. You would be orphaned into the world in an innocent kind of way again. I often think that, you know, the human existence is this constant cycle of making a home for yourself in the world. And just as you've got the house exactly as you want it, and the color scheme and the shower head you can live with, and you're just tacking up the last picture on the wall, there's a knock on the door and you're out, you know. And the initial, if you think of your life, you know, go back over your life, you'll see this constant cycle occurring just as you've got exactly everything as you want it. That's when you hear, you know, something coming for you at the door. And the initial reaction is, life and the world is merciless, and it will never leave me alone. In fact, D.H. Lawrence wrote about this. He said, who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? It is someone come to do me harm. And then he catches himself. He says, who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? It is someone come to do me harm. And he says, no, no, it is the three strange angels. Admit them, admit them. So as you start to build your experience around the cycles, you know, of creativity, you start to understand, as I think Ken was speaking about in his talk this morning, that failure is an integral part of it. Because what we perceive as failure is actually the moment where you get the knock on the door, you open it, and you have to step out. But you step out into territory which you do not yet recognize, and so it seems as if you're stepping out into the dark. But eventually, you know, as you get familiar with the unknown, you start to realize that life is not merciless. It's actually infinitely merciful, and it's constantly inviting us into much larger worlds than we imagine we belong to. You know? But we will never, ever be able to short-circuit that threshold, you know, where you feel as if your old world is gone and there's no, as yet, no solid world to take its place. And that's why I think familiarity with the unknown, familiarity with the fluidity of the world, familiarity with the unknowns and fluidity of your own self are absolutely essential now in the world of work. Partly because there's tremendous reasons for fear out in the world, you know, whether they're business reasons for fear these days, you know, or whether they're actually fear of just the way the whole, you know, social, political complexion of the planet is going. There's tremendous possibility now for deep wells of fear and difficulty to come to the surface. And therefore, it's very important that each of us, and especially all of you with the responsibility you carry as you go out in a sense, in an almost apostolic way, into these companies and engage in these conversations with people who have tremendous amount of sway and power, that you're able to carry this familiarity with the unknown and with a fluidity which doesn't always keep you in the manner to which you were accustomed. In other words, you'd be creating conversations that were very courageous. Why should I not be glad to contemplate the clouds clearing beyond the dormer window and a high tide reflected on the ceiling? There will be dying, but there is no need to go into that. I think what Mahan is saying here is not to ignore dying, but at the point at which you're truly engaged in your life, death and life and success and failure don't occur to you in the same black and white way. When you're living out your life, that's your life and not someone else's you've mistaken as your own, then failure takes on a very different aspect because it's part of a much larger story that has meaning to it. I often think that one of the reasons we're afraid of our own creativity and afraid of the soul, and everyone has to wrestle with their own fear of their own virtues in a way and powers in the world, is because the soul would much rather fail at its own life than succeed at someone else's. Soul would much rather fail at its own life than succeed at someone else's. Why should I not be glad to contemplate the clouds clearing beyond the dormer window and a high tide reflected on the ceiling? There will be dying, but there is no need to go into that. The poems flow from the hand unbidden, and the hidden source is the watchful heart, The sun will rise in spite of everything, and the far cities are beautiful and bright. I lie here in a riot of sunlight, watching the daybreak and the clouds flying. Everything is going to be all right. But almost always we begin this journey, whether it's in the artistic world or the business world, or now in the postmodern world where those two things are having to come together. You begin it in a place where you actually don't know where you are in the world. It's a very healthy place to start. You start by being lost. And in the inherited business world, you were very quick to make sure everyone around the table knew that you knew exactly what was going on all of the time, And you would almost never admit to not knowing or to being lost in the world. But when you think about it, the actual ability to be lost is quite a striking one and a useful one and a way of actually paying attention to your world. Because if you think about it, if you've ever been lost on a mountainside or in the woods or out on the ocean, there's a certain scintillating kind of attention that comes into your body when you're lost that you would not have if you thought you knew where you were. There's a certain kind of attention you're paying to the world where, for instance, if you're on a blizzard on a mountainside, everything you see is a clue as to how you might survive in the world. And so there's an absolute spark of vitality and presence and attention, and you don't miss anything, and you don't miss any step, and you're just looking, and you are wrestling, and you're in total conversation with all of the elements around you. And in those situations, it's always the people who lose their faculties of attention and who lose, their powers in the world and who become sleepy in a way that usually lose their lives at the same time. You can talk about that metaphorically, We could talk about it in a real way. Here's a life or death poem. It's a teaching story from the Pacific Northwest, where I make my home now. I live on Whidbey Island in the Puget Sound area, Washington State. And in the old days, the old maritime forest stretched all the way from Oregon all the way up to southeast Alaska. 200-foot, 150-foot high canopy, Douglas fir, cedar, hemlock trees. You walk into the remnants of those forests even to this day, and you only have to walk 100 yards and you lose sight of all 4 cardinal directions. You can't tell which way is east, south, north, or west. So a very real question for a child growing up in those forests was, grandfather, grandmother, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? What do I do when I'm lost in the forest, when I don't know where I am? This could equally be asked by a street kid in Philadelphia or a middle manager in a large global corporation. What do I do when the level of complexity around me is so high that I actually cannot place myself in it? And this is asked in a very real way by many people, who have responsibility and leadership. Almost everyone these days is feeling overwhelmed and stressed by the level of complexity that surrounds them. So the child says, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? This is the answer the elder gives. He says to the child, stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. Listen, listen. The forest breathes, it whispers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it. You must let it. You must let it find you. This last line is not, as I'm sure you can intuit, an invitation to passivity, to wheeling back your comfortable chair, putting your hands behind your head, feet up on the desk, and waiting for the emerging global markets to come and find you. What the elder is saying is you actually have to pay a tremendous amount of attention to your world before it will actually engage you in conversation, and you have a possibility of knowing where you are. So he's saying to the child, you have to come out from behind yourself. The child starts by saying, what do I do when I am lost in the forest? And the elder says, you can't get there from here. This I is too small. A couple of thousand years ago, there was a Chinese sage, Wu Wei Wu, who wrote a little gatta. And in it, he said, why are you unhappy? This is a rhetorical question. He's a poet. He's going to answer it, so just sit back. Don't exercise him. Says, why are you unhappy? Because 98.98% of everything you do and all that you say is for yourself, and there isn't one. Why are you unhappy? Because 98.98% of everything you do and all that you say is for yourself, and there isn't one. What does he mean by that? I think he means that the circle we draw around ourselves that we call the I is almost always too small, and it's almost always static. And therefore it actually loses the very definition of life by not being fluid and vital and engaged in relationship, with the world around it.